Hello, everyone. Today, we want to come back to you with regards to the Small Ruminant Revitalization Program on Long Island in the Bahamas. Previously, we visited the island of Long Island, basically two consultants and staff of the Bahamas Development Bank to assess what is going on in the field. And we did promise that we would come back when we would have looked at the information and put together a project to benefit the small ruminant, that is sheep and goat farmers of Long Island. We have made several attempts to come back to you, but were restricted by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so in order to fulfill our obligations, we are here today with this workshop, which is part and parcel of the overall project, to present to you what our findings are and our recommendations to move this small ruminant program or industry or subsector forward in the Long Island and by extension, the Bahamas at large. So Dr. Cox and myself, I am Dr. Ashton Stanley, and I have Dr. Cox here. So I'm an animals livestock specialist, and I lecture and coordinate the livestock activities at BAMC. So I'm the lead consultant on the project. I will give Dr. Cox a chance to introduce himself and to indicate what his specialty is.
Good day, all. Hi, it's a pleasure to be back here to present to you yet again. My name is Dr. Keith Cox. I'm a Bahamian veterinarian who has been providing service for almost nearly 10 years to the Bahamian community and community surrounding our country in the area of livestock development and livestock production. I am a consultant on this project with Dr. Stanley, and we have had the opportunity to go and bring to you findings on to how we can help develop and continue developing the subsect of small ruminants here in the Bahamas to modernize the system of farming and to give us the opportunity to enter that arena and become better at this production. Dr. Stanley?
All right, thank you, Dr. Cox. So here we have the two consultants, Dr. Cox and myself, and the project that we're looking at have basically two components to it, two main components. And the first one is to develop an agribusiness model that would modernize the small ruminant farming in the Bahamas to ensure sustainability. And by sustainability, we mean that there is continuity and there is no pressure on natural resources, and productivity. We need it to be productive and profitable, and that we can expand the trade of small ruminant products. We also want to identify what are the appropriate product quality management techniques, and of course, train the farmers in standard compliance, labeling, and competitiveness of the farm products. And this, of course, would enable us to produce the quality that is required, and of course, to compete in any given market based on the standards that we want to recommend going forward. So in our field visits, we found out a number of things. And so the contents of this presentation would look at the background, things that we would have found out. What is the current situation of small ruminant farming on Long Island, and what are the specific needs to move this project forward? How is climate change and the impact of climate influencing the production of small ruminants on Long Island and in the Bahamas, and what measures can be used or implemented to reduce these impacts? We also want to look at what are the physical needs and services that should be provided for the farmers to move their production, and what are some of the animal husbandry and management practices that are needed in the subsector. And of course, we want to look at the draft guide for SPS compliance and quality label of the small ruminant product going into the market. Of course, this last one might not be rest with the farmers themselves, but they have to have an open eye to make sure that their product is reaching into the market based on the guidelines. And notwithstanding our presentation today, we expect to share this on the Bahamas Development Bank's website, that all stakeholders can look at it and view it, and maybe even pass comments for improving in terms of going forward. We're going to also create a YouTube channel that some people, if they're not too tech savvy in getting onto the website, that will send those links straight to your phone, that you can, particularly the farmers, go click on the link and get onto YouTube and look at this presentation. So these are the specific areas that I would look at, and then Dr. Cox would come back and then look at the specifications and the needs with regards to the buildings and what support is needed at the building, so that everything comes together the way that we perceive it. So you'll have an idea of what we are talking about in terms of the building. So by way of the background, it is important that we look at some parameters that affect livestock production, right? These are some things that sometimes we take for granted, right? Where are we located? We are located basically in the hurricane belt, which means that from time to time, there is a possibility that the Bahamas or Long Island would be affected by some major hurricane. What that does is that it puts the industry, or it sets back the industry. And so part of our strategy with regards to housing, which Dr. Cox will talk about, is to make sure that the housing that we provide would provide some type of resilience to hurricane impacts. Then we look at our topography, right? Our lands are basically low-lying areas with keys, right? Which means that they are subjected to flooding. This is not something that we want. When we interviewed many of the farmers, they indicated that at times when in past storms that water had reached somewhere at their hip or higher, which is not good for small ruminants. Further, they indicated that they would have lost a number of animals due to the flooding. So our housing would take care of that. We did indicate that we fall within the hurricane belt, but the soil is very alkaline, thin layer. And this, of course, impacts the forage, the growth of the forage, right? So you would find on Long Island, in fact, that's what we saw when we went there, is basically forage trees or shrubs that the animals would eat, right? So that is an issue by itself. And then water, most of the water, because of the nature of the soil, would pass through the soil quite easily, and not enough water remain in the upper layers of the soil to support grass growth. And so you have these shrubs. So the vegetation found in the island follows the pattern of rainfall, with pines and broadleaf species in wetter north to scrub-like and xeric species in the drier south. So you don't have the type of grass growing as a luxury as you would find in some of the other islands. So these are some important parameters that would help to inform how we go forward with the planning and the development or implementation of this project. So what are the key objectives of our project that we want to implement? We want to address the weaknesses at the farm level, and we will bring them out as we go ahead, whatever the weaknesses are, what we were able to identify, and to conduct a market analysis to identify trade opportunities. That is what we want, because we did say earlier that we want productivity, and if we're going to increase productivity, it means then that we are more product to the market. So we want to identify what are the trade opportunities for domestic and possibly export markets, and to develop a table guide, a farm to table guide, to consider the sanitary and phytosanitary measures and labeling. In other words, we want our product to be safe, right, wholesome, and we want our products to be properly labeled, that people could determine what they buy, labeled in terms of date and things like that, who produced it, where it came from, so we have some level of traceability if there is need to recall a particular product from the market. And of course, as we go on, this is just an introduction to what are the specifics in our project that we are looking at, and does not really go into deep or into depths of some of the issues in terms of farm management and so forth. So from time to time, you would be asked to attend workshops and so as the program or the implementation phase of the program, and even beyond that, progresses. So we are asked to make sure that you have training in capacity building on the standard compliance and use of quality label, and of course, sustainability of competitiveness in the market. So these are some of the key objectives in the project that we need to address. So what is expected mainly? What are we expecting to do, to achieve? When this project is completed, we expect that the model that we will put forward, the business model and those things that we'll propose at the farm level would be accepted by the farmers on one hand, and by the bank, who is one of the beneficiaries. So the main beneficiaries are, of course, the farmers, and the bank, who is, if I may use the expression, going between the overall sponsors, which are TradeCom, right? So then we want the participating farmers implement the recommendations, right? So we will put forward a number of recommendations. Certainly, if the farmers do not implement the recommendations, then the outcome or what we are looking for might be hampered by the lack of implementing these recommendations. We want to develop a product accessible to the market in terms of requirements, production requirements, what type of animals that would meet the particular requirements of those persons who are interested in buying. The requirements would also mean that you have to make sure that the product is produced in a facility, right, that could give the consumer some kind of confidence with regards to the wholesomeness of the product that they are buying for consumption. This project has the opportunity also to provide economic opportunities for persons on Long Island, and by extension, if it can be duplicated to other islands. So we want people to get work. In all sectors along this chain, there is going to be opportunities for work for persons. So what are we proposing? What are we going to be proposing in this system? We visited Long Island, and we know that the current system that is being practiced is an extensive system of livestock production, which means that for the most part, the animals are out there in the elements, the wind, the sun, the rain, and they eat there, they reproduce there. They are subjected to dog attacks and people stealing them. I understand wild boars are taking the young ones And a multiplicity of problems exist with this type of system. So we want to bring to you a system that provides some departure from this. So in that system, we're saying the animals outside all the time. It is low cost, of course, comparatively. There is high mortality, that means deaths outside there. High predation by dogs and wild pigs, as we say, and high level of inbreeding. High level of inbreeding is something that, you know, it is progressive. You might not see it easily, but it creeps up on you. And of course, that results in poor reproductive and productive performances, animal slow growth rate, and you have breeding problems. So as a departure from that system, we are recommending a semi-intensive system of livestock production. That is what we are proposing, right? Which means that the animals are going to be allowed to graze, then they're going to be housed and fed concentrates, right? So they go out for a portion of time, they eat some of that green forage that they're accustomed to. So in this system, we are not saying, done away with all that you're doing. There's still provision for the animals to go out and graze. But to get the type of productivity that we spoke about, to get the type of conformation in the animal carcass, then we need to make some changes and standardize the production, right? So the farmers who will be selected on this program would be expected to have the buildings. We expect that you make sure that these animals go out, do some grazing, and when it's returned in the house, most likely in the night or evening, then it is fed some form of concentrates. Why are you feeding these concentrates? Because you're not sure that these animals are getting all of the required nutrients that they need in the field, right? The animals by nature are designed to eat forage, grass, but the grass at times is of poor quality. And so for the animal to grow as you would like it to grow, then you will have to give it supplements. So anything that you feed ruminants, sheep and goat and cattle, apart from forage, should be called supplements, because by nature, as I said, they are designed to eat forage. The system comparatively is a little more expensive, but when we talk about productivity, because the system is a little more expensive initially, capital expenditure, over time, we expect that this would surpass the cost, the initial cost, that this would balance out itself, right? So you will not feel it afterward. In this system also, there is low mortality because the animals are right there with you. You could monitor them, and of course, it would reduce the predation by dogs and wild pigs. We also would want to recommend that most of the time that the animals are out at pasture, right? The farmer is present at that particular time to reduce the possibility of the animals being stolen or being taken by dogs and pigs. Then, why another thing that we want to make sure that we have this type of system is that it is easier for us to do record keeping. So we are not proposing a full intensive system. It is a semi, in and out at times. So you could record, because recording of your animals is going to be very important in what we're going to be proposing for this system. We did say we have some high level of inbreeding up there. Down here, when we record, then we have a chance to control the breeding, control the males that are going with the females. If you're not going to be using them for breeding, castrate them if you need them to run with the entire herd. So you want to control your breeding, so you determine which males are going to mate with which females. So you could almost predict what you're going to get in the offspring. Now, we talk about some of the things that in terms of your climate, how that affect your livestock production, right? So we have basically two dimensions. They either affect them directly or they affect them indirectly. So what are some of the direct impacts of climate change or on small ruminants? How would it affect them? Temperature, increased temperature, because we are all aware, and we heard the comment many times that this is not the same sun that used to be years ago. Temperatures are very hot, right? Evaporation, water loss. The animals is going to lose water from their own bodies, because we're talking about direct impact. And it increases stress. Heat stress and other forms of stress are direct impacts of this climate change on the animal. And the indirect impacts now would be things like the low rainfall, because this is not directly on the animal itself, but the effect of low rainfall would affect what? It would affect the water availability to the animal, the amount of water. It would affect low water infiltration into the soil. So the aquifers might not get recharged, right? The aquifer might not get recharged. Most of the water is underground water that is available. Its effect on plant growth. The animal is going to eat forage. If there is reduced rainfall, then forage growth would be severely affected, and low feed availability for your animals. Indirect, you could have things like floods that we spoke about. Floods, the whole place covered with water, right? And so it could lead to death, as some of you would have reported, deaths of scores of animals. It also can affect the water quality, because this can affect your wells and so forth. So you have your direct impacts, which impact the animal itself, and you have the indirect impact, which affects most of the environment that has an impact upon the production of the animal itself. So we have to be aware of all of these, right? So while we were there in Long Island, the current situation reveals to us the type of breeds of animals that you have, right? And we concluded that for most of them, that they were mixed. There were traces of many different animals, including native animals, of course, mixed with all of these animals. But we highlighted the fact that they were very well adapted to the environment there. The environment, in this case, I speak of the type of forage, the type of climate, the water, and all of that they're getting. And even the worms, because most of the farmers say that they don't even bother to deworm their animals. Right? So we talked of upgrading the herd, but we also said, because the animals are adapted, we don't really want to get rid of that. We want the animals to maintain that level of adaptation, but we want to bring in, or it would be recommended that animals be brought in to upgrade, right? So that you could get some males and upgrade the current stock. And so that the genes that the animals currently have, right, would be maintained. The type of feed, which we alluded to before, is the forage trees that they have. Your jumbe, your ramson, your cinecord, your lignum vitae, and all of that you have, right, is for the most part feed that is available. And of course, the concentrates. So many of you indicated that you would feed some concentrate mainly at the evening and to keep the animals in a habitual state of coming back to the premises so that they don't get wild. Whatever the purpose is, feeding of concentrates is recommended. And some of you would have used the multi-nutrient block that you purchased from the store. So these are some things that you are already doing, right? You're allowing the animals to eat forage, you're feeding some concentrates, and you're using multi-nutrient blocks. So all of this going forward would be recommended. We noted that in terms of fencing, right? You need the fencing because in the absence of fence, to some extent, it would reduce animals that prey on your animals. We realized that in terms of the farms that we looked at, there were no divisions. Where a perimeter fence existed, most of them were in a state of disrepair. They needed repairing, right? And the browsing area that you have, that's what I'm saying. There was no subdivision in the browsing areas. And for some of the farmers, the animals roam and basically come back to the premises at evening, of course, with the expectation that they would get those concentrates. So all of that is good, but we want to depart from that in our new system. And we are not saying that some of these things are not worthwhile. We will get back to some of them. So what are some of the needs? You need the housing, right? The animals there, they are exposed to the elements, the sun and rain and so forth. So we want to give the animals a chance to have a place where they could relax themselves and escape some of these harsh environmental conditions. The housing also prevents or minimizes, right, the predation and predator larceny. Predator larceny is what we call stealing of these animals. So the housing do have some major benefits. We also realized that there was the absence of animal health and extension services. Now, this is going to be needed going forward. We're going to have dedicated animal health and animal extension services provided if we want to move this process forward. And this is where the farmers might need to agitate a little bit to get the authorities to provide these essential services to move the industry forward. There was no abattoir. There was no abattoir on the island. And so there is always question in the absence of an abattoir of the quality of the product that is produced. To enter some types of market, you would need to have proof that the animal was slaughtered in an approved facility. And so that food safety was at the heart of that slaughtering process. There is no quality label, of course, at this stage, but that is something we want to recommend. So there is poor consumer confidence. Well, let me rephrase that, right? When the abattoir is up and running, then consumer confidence would be greater because they would be assured that the product was slaughtered, that the animal was slaughtered in an approved facility and that the product is better for or more wholesome for consumption. Now, we want to also look at the management of growth stages, the physiological states we call it. And without going into any depth, we say that we want to look at herd health. And what are some of the herd health things that we want to look at? Of course, we want to make sure that you set up your worming program because you're coming from an extensive system into a semi-intensive system. It means that the worm burden can be more concentrated. And so this will have to be built into your management or your herd health program. Things like cutting of hoofs is also going to be important. Dehorning, all of these things are going to be important. Pasture management and utilization, how you move your animals through the pasture, how you utilize the pasture in terms of what management practice that you would utilize. And your biosecurity, animal identification and record keeping are also important. And how do you transport your animals? We'll get back to those. But before we do, we want to look at the sheep and goat reproductive cycle that we will propose in the project going forward. At the top, we have both male and female, male on the right and the female on the left, both sheep and goat. So you have the ewe, the doe, and the ram and the buck. So we are saying that in this reproductive and productive cycle, when the male and the female mate, the time of pregnancy is for 5 months. After the 5 months have expired and the animal gives birth, then it's a lamb or kid, depending on sheep or goat, right? We want to hold that lamb and kid with its mother for just 8 weeks, for both sheep and goat in our system. Usually in other system, it might be different for goats, but the system that we are proposing, both sheep and goat, lamb and kids, would remain with the mother for 8 weeks. Now, after 8 weeks, that female, that mother, would go back and be mated again so that the cycle continues, so you get more lambs or kids. Alternatively, those weaners, whether kids or lambs, would go to a facility, the same facility, or in a different class, where they go out. And at that stage, you would need to select those animals that you need, that you have observed or performed well, whether by birth weight or weaning weight, or things like that, to be future parents of your herd. So you see this pink line that goes back up to the ewe and doe and the ram and dog. This is where you're selecting them from. So they go back up to be future parents. Apart from that, we want to make sure that when the animals are grown out, that they would reach to the market in a period of 6 to 8 months, and that they would have a weight of 70 to 80 pounds. This is the requirement of the production system that we want to propose. No longer would you be keeping those animals for a year and 2 years before they are marketed, because that is going to affect the quality. That is going to affect the specific market requirements. And so the production system being designed is expected to market animals at 6 to 8 months with a market weight of 70 to 80 pounds. So we come back to the animal feeding and management. Now, these terms, right, in flushing. Flushing basically is something that we want to practice in this production system. And we have allocated in our model feed, concentrate feeds to provide for these flushing and the last trimester and lactation. And flushing basically is giving the females at least 2 weeks before you mate them. Good quality pasture with legumes and some concentrate. And what that does, it increases ovulation. And if ovulation, which is the release of the egg, because if the egg is not released and the egg is not healthy, it is going to affect the coming together of the male and the female reproductive cells. right? So you wouldn't have conception, right? So flushing is important to allow the animal to produce the products of ovulation and for conception. About 2 weeks before the animal is mated, you're going to provide all of these nice nutrients, right? Then it is also important in the last trimester that you provide good quality forage, and concentrates, because in the last trimester, it is the time when the fetus, that is the developing young, is developing fastest, and the animal in itself would need additional nutrients for the development of that fetus, right? If you do not do that, particularly in the case where the animal is carrying two, that is twins or more, there is a special condition that the animal can succumb to. And I just said it carries two or more. So that condition sometimes famously is called twin lamb disease or ketosis, right? Or pregnancy toxemia. So the animal becomes, because it is not getting enough, it could be water. The water is very important. If you feed the animal dry matter and it doesn't have any water, then energy becomes a problem. Because this condition really hinges on the low energy intake of the animal. So water deprivation can result in pregnancy toxemia or twin lamb disease. So it is imperative that in that last stage, that you make sure that the animal has good quality forage, enough water at that stage, because it might result in the animal having an abortion. It can also result in the death of the mother. So be very careful. And as I said, all of these points would be developed further when you have other training. The lactation. Now the animal is going to give milk, right? So you have to make sure that when the animal is suckling its young, that it is provided with the additional required nutrients to provide enough milk to sustain the young. And the nutrients also for the animal to replenish its body reserves. In terms of the breeding male, we just want to feed some extra feed in the breeding season. When the male is being exposed to the females, you give it some extra quality pasture and legumes and some concentrate, so that of course it can perform its duties well. The fatteners, you adjust the feed by weight. Animals are known to eat a certain percentage of their body weight. So it is going to be critical in this system that you weigh these animals periodically and adjust the feed, whether it's concentrates or other feeds, adjust that based on the body weight. So that is going to be important. In terms of the newborn and processing, we have to make sure that the animals alternatively would have been in the wild, and most of those things would have been done in the wild by nature. So we have to make sure now that we remove those mucus from the nose of the lamb or kid when it is born so that it breathes. Then you put it with the mother, allow the mother to clean it off and accept it as its own. You make sure that you clip that umbilical cord and you spray it or dip it with your tincture of iodine, because failure to do that can result in what we call joint ill or navel ill, which is an infection, an organism that would pass through the open umbilicus and affect the animal. So you don't want that to happen. So you cut the umbilical cord. And one of the reasons for cutting that umbilical cord is that if it is left long, the mother can stand on it. And the mother stands on it and the young attempts to move, it can, of course, damage that area of the umbilicus. You don't want that. So you clip that and you disinfect it. Then importantly, you want to make sure that the young gets that first creamy milk, which we call colostrum. That is critically important in the first few hours of its life, not next week. In the first few hours of life, that young should get the colostrum. So what the colostrum does, the colostrum passes what we call passive immunity, right? It has these antibodies in it that we call immunoglobulins, which are large proteins, right? And the reason why we are saying that it needs to get it in the first couple of hours is that when that time passes, the newborn does not have the ability to benefit from these immunoglobulins, because these immunoglobulins are absorbed to the walls of the stomach, right, into the blood of the animal that passes this passive immunity. So if you allow that to close, right, and this is something that they call gut closure. After these hours have passed, the gut closes. And what we mean when we say the gut closes is that these spaces in the gut where these immunoglobulins or antibodies would pass would close. So the animal basically cannot benefit from the antibodies in the colostrum again. The colostrum also provides a laxative effect. The colostrum provides a laxative effect for the newborn, because coming through the birth canal, anything the animal could have swallowed anything. And of course, other stuff in the digestive system. The effect of colostrum causes that laxative effect. Something that they call meconium, right? It passes out all of that dark colored stuff and cleanse the digestive system. So the colostrum is very, very important, right? So you have to make sure that the animal is well fed at that time. And of course, you provide enough warmth or bedding to bed down that animal in the thing. Because remember now, all of these things now would be happening in the house, right? And so we in animal science say, if you're going to remove an animal from the wild, which is by nature where it really came from, having been domesticated, is that you must simulate the environment as if it were in the natural. So all of those things that the animal would do in the wild for itself, you now have to try to provide those things once the animal is being housed, right? So then in terms of our herd health, we are saying, as I said, we will have come back to this, in routine management, right? You have to take care of your internal and external parasites. So you have to develop a routine worming program. You have to routinely observe the animals for any abnormalities, whether on the skin, eyes, whether in the feces, or whatever. Observation now is going to be key in terms of preventing certain diseases. So you have your worms, your internal parasites, and you have your external parasites, like flies and ticks and lice and mites and so forth. So you might need to treat for them if they are a problem where you're at. Because the animals are housed also, you need to, from time to time, of course, this would come from observation, to trim the hoofs. Animals, ruminants, the horny part of the hoof sometimes overgrows. And of course, it affects the way the animal walks. And so you might need, from time to time, to practice this management thing. So we say here, animal inspection and observation is key to all of that. So no longer when the animal is out in the wild that you can't see it. When it comes in, make that part of your routine that you do these inspections to see if there is anything wrong. What we observed also in Long Island when we went there is that you have all of these trees that I mentioned earlier, the jumbe, the sinicord, the ram's horn, the lignum vitae, all of these. But I did not observe where any of these trees were pruned, right? So it may be necessary going forward to prune some of these trees so that they are in the reach of the animals. Of course, some goats do a better job at climbing up than the sheep, but even the goats, some of these trees are out of the reach. So what they depend upon sometimes is the fallen leaves and pods and seeds and so forth that they utilize as part of their feed. So going forward, you might need to prune the trees to bring them back in the reach of the animal so that forage availability would be greater. So you control the grazing and the browsing. And by that, we were thinking of subdividing the paddock, subdividing the land that you have. So you determine exactly where the animals go rather than just walking all over. Because what that does essentially is that the animal walks so much that the little food it eats sometimes, it uses it as energy and puts on less weight. So it's the energy is coming in, but it is going out, walking up all over the place. It takes energy to do that. So if you could control the movement of the animal by some subdivision in the pasture, this would help to give a better product. Furthermore, when the animal have to do all of that walking to find feed, it increases connective tissue in the muscle and the meat gets harder. So you need to try to paddock off your enclosures. Limit the number of animals to each enclosure. If you do not do that, then there are chances of, now I'm recommending that you subdivide. So now I'm saying subdivide, then I'm telling you to limit the number of animals per enclosure. And this is something that may have to develop over time to determine the number of animals that are adequate for enclosure, because these are not pasture with grasses. These are fodder trees, and there may not be enough experience or literature, information available with the number of animals per enclosure. But we could determine that going forward in terms of practicing this thing. So you control where they go and where they go. This also helps to manage your worm burden. So this is also important. Now, we also are very keen on our biosecurity, right? Biosecurity really is the measures that you use on your farm to prevent the transfer of diseases, whether around your farm or off your farm or onto your farm. What measures that are you using? Now, one, we talk about isolation and quarantine. Now, you know of the COVID situation here. So that when people comes into the country, you hear that they have to go into quarantine. So why are you quarantining them? You're not necessarily quarantining them because they have something, but you are aware of a particular disease that may be prevalent in your area or spreading around. You have some idea of what is the incubation period of that particular organism. And so you're going to hold them in quarantine. Here we say 14 days for the COVID, right? So you hold that animal in quarantine for a period of time which you think a particular disease is present, and gives that disease a chance to express itself in the animal if it is present, because you don't want to bring that animal on the farm and then all of your animals get infected. So you hold it. So quarantine really has to do with animals coming onto the farm. Quarantine basically has to do with animals coming onto the farm, like people coming from America, and you suspect them of COVID. You quarantine them. Now, if some animals are you have your herd of animals and you realize that one of them is sick. Now you don't want that sick one to infect the others. So what you're going to do? You're going to isolate it. So similarly with your COVID situation, if you suspect somebody in the house to have COVID, you have to isolate them. You have to isolate them. So there's a little difference between quarantine and isolation. Isolation really means within what you have, and you identify and then you separate. So quarantine now has to do with coming onto the farm, right? Because I did indicate earlier that the biosecurity has to do with the measures in the farm itself, and also going off of the farm and coming onto the farm. So there are measures that you could take. You have your wheel bath and your sanitation points and so forth. So brings us to the next issue of biosecurity. The other component of biosecurity, there are three of them. The other component of biosecurity has to do with sanitation. Sanitation. Do you have proper sanitation points on your farm? What do you do for sanitation? Do you have foot baths? Do you have wheel baths? Do you have hand station, proper toiletry facilities with proper washing and so forth? All of these are important in terms of sanitation, right? Sanitation also in terms of how you clean, and the type of disinfectants that you're going to use and how you apply them. The last component of biosecurity is traffic control. How do we control traffic on the farm? How do we move on the farm? How do we get around on the farm? How do we move our instruments and implements on the farm? How do we use them on the farm? Very simply put, one, in terms of our traffic control, we never go to old animals and then young animals. Never that should happen. So you always go to your older animals, to your younger animals, and then the younger ones. The older animals may have something that they are able to tolerate. The younger ones are now developing immunity for whatever is present on the farm. So you go to them first, and then you go to the older ones. In addition, you do not go to sick animals and then healthy animals. You always go to the healthy animals, and then you go to the sick ones last. So all of this has to do with how you control your traffic on the farm. Now, if you have a particular, say, a barrow that you're using, you don't use that to carry a dead animal and then use the same barrow to bring feed, right? So you have to be careful of what tools and equipment that you're using on the farm and how you're using them and for what purpose. Be careful of how you travel, because you might be taking your traffic, you might be taking something from an infected area into a clean area, and then in short order, you have the particular infection all over the farm. So you isolate or quarantine, sanitation, and traffic control are the three important components of your biosecurity program, which can be easily implemented on the farm. Now, in addition to all of this, we want to look very seriously at animal identification and record keeping. So these have been put forward in our project. So we have a proposed animal identification that we want to implement in the project going forward. And this one specifically speaks to Long Island, where we say that we need a country code. And so LI for Long Island, LI. So in the ear tags that we would propose, then you would have LI. So anywhere in the Bahamas, you know that this product came from Long Island. It was Long Island small ruminant product. Then that's the country code. Then we want to have a farm ID. So we have numbers from 01 to X, whatever X is. So each farm would be assigned a number, which would stay with that farm. So you would have Long Island, then you would have the farm ID. So the X refers to the number of farms on the program. So X, in this case, I could say probably tends to infinity, because there could be any number of farms that come onto the program. So you have the Long Island, then you have specifically the farm ID. Then you have a number for the animal. Okay, country code, LI, farm number, it could be 6. The animal ID could be 48. So you have 3 things there, right? So how do we represent that as an example of what I am saying here? So we have Long Island, the farm could be number 6, and the animal ID could be 234. So all of this can be represented on an ear tag, right? So we know in terms of our record keeping can go back to this particular animal, right? And determine which mother, which father produced this animal, right? And further in terms of our traceability, right? So what are some of the benefits of this animal identification and record keeping? Important records that you need to have is the parents, male and female. So you have this offspring. Who is the male? Or who is the father? And who is the mother? What weight was this animal when it was born? During the time the animal was born until the time you wean that animal, what weight did you wean this animal at? You might need to have progress weight. If you want, you can do weight between weaning and birth, or birth and weaning. What weight did you market this animal at? Or what weight was this animal bred at? What were the medication used? So these are just some examples of the type of records that you can use on your farm that really makes sense, right? You might need to add other record parameters as you see fit, but these are important records. Now, for example, the medication. You need to know, for example, medication, because medication have withdrawal period. So if you just give the animal some medication and you did not record the date, how would you know what time that animal can go to market, so that that drug does not end up in the food system, right? So recording of all of these things are important things, because it can inform or provide the necessary information for decision making. In the whole system that we are looking at, we have what we call our target coefficients for the system. So we have reproductive and mortality and culling and so forth. So in terms of reproductive, we want our animals to have at the age of first mating to be 8 to 9 months. Of course, they will come sexually mature before that, but we do not want to mate them before 8 to 9 months. The weight at the first mating should be around 65 to 75 pounds. Sometimes we look at age, but weight can even be more critical in mating than just age. So the age at first lambing, when the animal lamb or kid first, we want it to be 12 to 14 months. A lambing rate at 1.8 lambs or kids, so you get 3 lambings or 2 kiddings every 2 years, right? So we have to make sure that the production system is up. Male to female ratio sheep and goat is 1 to 30 for flock mating. If you're mating by hand, you can go up to 1 to 50 or 1 to 60 in terms of a ratio. The mortality rate, of course, in any enterprise, some would die. It is not something we wish, but normally that happens. 10 to 15%, according to the literature, is acceptable for small ruminants. That is high. So if you don't want to go up to 10 to 15%, it means that your management of your animals will have to be key, right? Then we talk about in our production cycle that we need to replace a certain percentage in the flock per year. So what percentage that you would take out from those grow out to be future parents in the herd? It's about 3 to 5%. And we have done allocation for that in our model. The adults, you expect about 3% mortalities. Now look at the expected mortality for adults as against what is for the young, which means you have to pay special care to the young. Your profitability depends upon keeping these young alive and bringing them to market. Now, also, after a period of time, you might need to begin to get rid of some of the animals because they get old, they become unproductive, right? So you begin to get rid of them at a rate of 20 to 25% per annum. The age at slaughter, we did say, is about 6 to 8 months, and we want to have a slaughter weight of 70 to 80 pounds, bringing in a carcass of about 38 pounds. That's what we're aiming for in our production system, minded of our own peculiar circumstances here in the Bahamas. So we're getting a little closer now. So we have looked at most of what we want there on the farm, but transporting these animals now, you know, it is important to raise the best animal, but then you're going to transport this animal maybe to the abattoir, but you treat the animal so bad that at the abattoir and the term when it is being inspected, a lot of that meat has to be trimmed and discarded because of the way you load that animal or the way you unload it. So very special care has to be taken of the way you load this animal and the way you unload it. Meaning again, that special vehicle arrangement will have to be made, whether it is provided or you will have to arrange to take your animals. Importantly, we want to move animals either early in the morning or late in the afternoon to avoid the midday sun, right? You do not want to transport the animals when the sun is hot at all. So special requirements of the vehicle would be that it has a non-slip floor. It has side rails that you can really tie the animal, give the animal enough room that if it falls down, that it has enough neck room that it can lie down. If not, the animal would hang itself right there. If it falls and it cannot get up, there's a possibility that it would hang itself. So the vehicle must be very well ventilated to move these animals. So all of those special housing requirements, they are also applicable in the transport vehicle for the animals to the abattoir or anywhere else. So the loading and unloading, you must have necessary ramps, right? The thing about pulling the animal and sliding it up and beating it, those things should be a thing of the past. When the animals are being transported from the farm to the abattoir, we want to make sure that the animal records are given. So you're selling the animals, what are the necessary records that are available so when they go to the abattoir, because all of this will have to be built into the traceability of that animal if there is need to do anything with regards to the meat if it is discovered to be a problem. So the animal records supposed to be part and parcel when you're transporting those animals to the slaughterhouse. Now, In terms of what we propose for our quality control, right, is that this schematic here shows that. So from the farm, the production on the farm, the animals are transported to the abattoir and the processing unit. And we want to make sure that good agricultural practices, animal welfare, and animal identification are part and parcel of that process coming to the slaughterhouse, right? So in the slaughterhouse, we also want to make sure that good manufacturing practices, good hygiene practices, HACCP, the hazard analysis and critical control points are implemented. Product labeling and traceability are also in place for the processing. After the processing, we expect that the animals are transported out. So this requires, again, another special vehicle. The meat is frozen. You have to make sure that you have a special vehicle to maintain the cold chain of that product, right? So the meat comes out, it either goes to the wholesalers or the retailers. We say wholesalers or retailers because at the abattoir, we want to make sure that we can provide whether it is for wholesale or retailers. So the abattoir will have to have a facility to cut meat, package the meat, freeze the meat, label the meat, and so forth. All of these services would be done at the slaughterhouse. So it's safe handling of meat, right? At the wholesalers and retailers. And the consumers now are going to buy, whether you're buying from wholesaler, because some household buy wholesale, so that is not impossible, and the retailers. So the consumer is going to buy. Now, that meat is going to be either, we say, at the trade level or at the consumer level. Having left the abattoir, it is at the trade level, maybe in some warehouse by these wholesalers. Now, we did say here on the left, we talk about traceability. We should be able, if we discover something, to recall that particular meat from that warehouse out. That is why we have recall here. We want to be able to have a mechanism in place to take it out of the system. Similarly, that is the trade level, but similarly, we want to have a recall mechanism at the consumer level. So sometimes people would have purchased something and take it home. And it is at that point then that a problem is discovered. So at that point, we want to be able to recall that meat, right? And the only way you could know for sure is if all of these records came and there is a proper traceability system in place with regards to the Long Island, the farm ID, the animal ID, that all of that information, the treatment of the drug, and so forth, comes with the animal. It's like a birth paper or a medical card that everything follows that animal. So at ante-mortem inspection, that is when the animals are received at the abattoir, you surrender all records, or a copy of it for individual animals, right? There may be a possibility that you move animals in groups, and so that information may suffice if all coming to the abattoir. Animals must be allowed to rest for 24 hours in the lairage for the inspection, because in the lairage, you know, there is a possibility, the same thing that we talk about quarantine, right? Some of those diseases can develop while the animal is in the lairage. And if you don't inspect those animals and rest them, they would pass through the system, and those infections could be in the meat and pass on to humans when they consume that meat. So ante-mortem inspection allows the competent authority to exercise the duty of looking to see if the animal is exhibiting any signs of disease and to have them separated or isolated for further scrutiny. It is also a good time sometimes to check animals if they are pregnant or the animals have any other discharge or anything like that. And I know that in some other jurisdiction, it is also a good place where people come to see if their animals were stolen. If some people would have the heart to steal an animal and take it to the abattoir. In other cases, it is not like that, but it is a possibility that a stolen animal can end up in the abattoir. So if you miss an animal, that is a place to begin to look in the abattoir when the animal is being held in the lairage. So that ante-mortem inspection provides for all that. So in the slaughtering process, of course, we're talking about stunning and sticking because we want to make sure that the animals are slaughtered in the most humane possible way, right? It's not hitting on the head and so the animal is stunned. The animal is rendered immobile, right? So the stunning gun basically renders the animal immobile, so it cannot kick and move about, so you can handle the animal. And then you stick the animal to get it, to cut that jugular, and then the animal is hung for bleeding out. Bleeding out is important because if it is not done, then it can affect the quality of meat. Then you skin the animal. And while I'm talking about skinning, this skin is an opportunity for the farmers to save those skins and make a business out of it. Whether you're going to sell it for fish pot, whether you're going to sell it for cure it and process it for leather or for making drums or whatever it is. So there is some usefulness in the skin, and that is an option that can also be considered. So you skin and then you eviscerate. You take out all of the internal contents. And those internal contents also will have to be placed aside so that they can be inspected by the meat inspector. Then evisceration, and then you dress, you trim fat and so forth, you wash and you leave it for inspection. So after all of that, the competent authority again would come to do the post-mortem. This is now after death. So they're going to examine the carcass. They're going to examine the head, the feet, the intestine, and all of that is inside of that. Because all of these can tell a particular story. There is something that may be found in the head that you don't find elsewhere that would affect other parts of the body. So you have to inspect all of the parts of the animal. So you don't cut off the head and throw it away. You have to leave it, right? So that the inspector can have a look at it. So post-mortem examination would examine all of these parts. Then, having done that, you want to chill your carcass about 40 degrees Fahrenheit to reduce the multiplication of organisms, microorganisms that can proliferate and cause disease with persons who would consume the meat. Then you want to keep it at that temperature to allow what we call rigor mortis. So you want the animal to go through this stiffening, which is stiffening after death, and not just the stiffening, but that process must pass off. So it would stiffen up, and then that stiffening would relax itself. So that is the completion of rigor mortis. If rigor mortis is not done, in this case, you can end up with meat being a little tough sometimes. Then you want to freeze to core. Freeze it to the depth of the meat, minus 32 to minus 36 degrees Fahrenheit. That is what you want to happen to your meat, right? Then you go into your fabrication, cutting. You want to cut, and the way you cut it would depend upon the market requirement. Some people may not want the meat cut. Some people might say, listen, I need a whole carcass, or I need for you all to send carcasses. Some might say, I need them in halves, or some might say that they need them in quarters, whichever way. Or they want it to be further fabricated. So they want the wrap and the leg and the loin and all of that to be separated. And we are saying that if we have an abattoir, that we would like also to have a master butcher who is skilled in all of these things to meet the market requirements. So this is what we know we call the choice cuts. And what we're saying about choice cuts is that choice cuts usually would give you a better price than if you sell all of the meat of the carcass at the same price. So you look at those high price areas of the carcass and sell them at the market price. What is the market? You might get $10, $15 per pound for some of the portion of the carcass, right? So these are opportunities that need to be explored as the development of this industry go forward, that we can market by choice cut. Then you want to package by law. There is a law, a label law. And the law says that when you put in, remember, you're going to package all of this, you need to have some kind of label to say what it is, right? So in the Bahamas, law says it must be written in English and it must specify the product name. So if it is from the sheep, you know it is mutton. If it is from the goat, it is chevron. So you have to specify the product name, specifies the date of slaughter, and what is the possible expiration date. So meat frozen for a certain period of time may have a certain expiration date. And that is what we will have to include in the packaging. The label must permit the traceability of meat as set out in the regulations. And we keep talking about the traceability. Should something happen, we must be able to have all of these records, right? So it must say, sorry, where it come from, whose farm it came from, what was the animal number, and so forth and so forth. Traceability is important. So what information you want to capture for that traceability? We want the farm location. We want the island where the product was grown. We also need the farm where the animal was produced, the date that it was shipped to the slaughterhouse, what transport vehicle took it, and who are the people who took it, the crew, right? Then we also need the slaughterhouse use and the packing date if different from the slaughter date. These are important information to execute a traceability agenda. So in terms of the meat transport vehicle now, not the one that carries the animal to the slaughterhouse, but the meat transport, the processing. The transport vehicle used should be designed or constructed, maintained, and cleaned to prevent contamination, damage, and deterioration of the meat. You do not want a vehicle to be used for anything else. So such vehicles should be able to maintain the meat in a refrigerated or frozen state. You don't want a vehicle with the temperature load so that when you put it in, it begins to defrost and you have all kinds of drippings accumulating in the package. Not used to transport any material or substance that can adulterate or contaminate the meat. So specific requirements for this transport vehicle, if you're going to use it to transport meat. You know, sometimes you get a vehicle and it is for a purpose, but it is used for all other type of things. We do not want this to happen with regards to our meat transport vehicle. At the wholesalers and retailers, that they must have the traceability system involved, the record keeping system for the following records. We just say the common name of the product, a lot code, name and the principal name and owner of the business that prepared, stored, and labeled the product. Because you might have a wholesaler who took halves and carcass and they did some further processing. We need to have all of that information because maybe that is where the problem started. The name and principal place of the business you receive the product from, and on what date, the place the product was removed or stored before it was shipped to another supplier. And records must be kept and maintained for easy retrieval. Sometimes you go to a place to get a record and they take 2 days. They tell you to come back. We do not want that because maybe somebody's life is at risk. You want to have the records for easy retrieval and must be provided upon request by the competent authority. So you cannot decide you're going to block that. At the consumer level, we are looking to propose that there is some kind of training, basic food safety, such as cleaning, separating raw meat from cooked and ready to eat products, cooking to safe internal temperature, and good chilling practices in addition to food poisoning. Because, again, the problem might have originated here. Sometimes people would buy meat and they have it and they drive around the vehicle with it all day in the back of the truck. And all of that time the meat is becoming contaminated, and then it is easy to lay blame and say, okay, they bought some meat somewhere and that was that way was the problem originated. But it may not have been so. So consumers need to be trained in the proper ways of handling and maybe cooking meat to safe temperatures. All of that is part and parcel of the recommendation. So we are not leaving anybody out. It's from farm to table that we are looking at. Then, if there is a problem, we want to be able to recall that product. And I did go through these already at the trade level and at the consumer level. So where you have those things in supermarkets and warehouses and so forth, you need to be able to recall at that point. And if it goes to the consumer, then you ought to be able to record that from the consumer as well. So this is basically a synopsis of our work that we have been doing. And of course, we did indicate that these points would be developed further in future training programs. But I want to now ask Dr. Cox to give you the specifics as it relates to the housing and what other additions apart from the housing that we are recommending with this type of facility that would be provided. Dr. Cox?
Good day. Thank you, Dr. Stanley, for sharing your presentation. I'll continue on with providing a bit more information to our farmers in this training on climate change and its adaptation strategies necessary for a small ruminant production moving forward. First of all, we'd like to start is, what is climate change? Climate change is described as a change in the average conditions in a region over a long period of time. These conditions we basically want to look at would be temperature change, the increase in temperature. As Dr. Stanley noted earlier, it feels severely hotter than it was several years ago. Conditions regarding rainfall. There are many parts of our region that are experiencing drought conditions, okay? We've known that the Earth's surface has been warming, with the warmest set of temperatures actually being recorded in some of the last 20 years. How is climate change expected to affect small ruminants? Climate change is projected to have an overall negative effect on small ruminant production in the region. Why is this so? We have factors of stress that occurs within climate change. Heat stress from increased temperatures and water stress from having a reduced amount of water availability through drought conditions. Now, these conditions affect several parts of the small ruminant production, namely being feed consumption. With high temperatures and low water, these stresses reduces the amount of feed the animals consume, which has an effect on production and obviously reproduction, how the animal reproduces, the effect that it reproduces, and the viability of the young. With these stressors of heat and water, we have elevated pest and disease presence that affects the animals significantly and in fact can increase our rate and risk of mortality. Okay. Increased evaporation negatively affects the comfort of the animals. This evaporation is water being evaporated from the animals by the heat involved from climate change in our area, okay? We have, again, resulting increase in diseases that affects the animals negatively. We have increase in abortions. We also have lower fertility and reproductive rates being proven through climate change, which results in high temperatures and high temperature conditions. How does drought affect the animals? How does drought affect small ruminant production? So lower amounts of water being available to filter into the soil reduces the availability for plant growth, reduces the amount of feed that we can actually produce, reduces the amount of how the plant actually produces, how it is built, how it is structured, and how it actually provides sustenance to our animals. So low rainfall negatively impacts, as we noted, plant growth, its development, and more so the quantity and the quality of the feed available for pastures for our animals. So less water is able to replenish our groundwater supply into our aquifers, producing less water for these same effects to the animals and to pasture developments. So some of our recommendations moving forward of how we can make adaptation changes towards our environment and to assist the development or greater production of small ruminants within this region. First of all, we must ensure that the animal nutritions are met, okay? So in this regard, we will have to, in some cases, look for the feasibility of importing high rations that have higher nutrient densities, better quality feed. So because feed is being produced in varied quantities and varied qualities, we must look at providing to the animals a nutrient that will support the requirements. Our next recommendation is construct elevated structures for the animals. Now, this is important to mitigate and to reduce the effects of high storm surge, flooding, and severe weather. Also, these type of structures are being developed to impact the direct animals from direct sunlight and elevated temperatures that reduces production and productivity. So one of our recommendations would be the way we actually construct the roof of these housing to secure properly sheets, support a structure that will not easily be separated during high winds, during tropical storms, thunderstorms, and even hurricanes. Most importantly is the orientation of our structures. The orientation helps in the way the sun, the wind, the rain, the climate condition affects our buildings and obviously the animals on the inside of it. So northeast orientation, northwest orientation, even southwest will greatly impact how our animals are impacted in these environments. So to maximize the resistance of our structures and improve the animal comfort is a major part of the design. This also facilitates proper airflow. And this airflow provides several factors to reduce evaporation, to reduce the amount of ammonia being absorbed by the animals from their own fecal matter. Another recommendation is to select specific types of forages that would aid in productive value, that we'll be able to conserve, and are also saline resistant or tolerant to salt intrusion, where we would find this in some cases inside of wells into these regions which would have been affected by storm surges and flooding. Okay. We also recommended that we erect appropriate structures in our pastures in the conditions where natural shade is not available but to give these animals an opportunity to get away from direct sunlight, which increases obviously heat stress, or facilitate evening grazing, where the animals are not directly under the sun, but we be able to take advantage of grazing opportunity forages and do this without being stressed. Another recommendation is to provide potable water and access. Potable water inside of the housing units, but even more so in the pastures during pasturing and grazing periods. Recommendation is to educate small ruminant farmers on climate smart practices through this and other training workshops that would help aid the production and reproduction of the herds and maintenance of them. Our recommendations moving forward towards our structural design are going to be displayed here. Elevated housing units, open airflow designs, roofing design, waste management systems, and water catchment systems, along with severe weather curtains. Our first model here that we're going to provide is a structure that is similar to what our design is going to be. This is an elevated structure. As you can see, this structure is above ground. We're recommending that all structures be elevated at least 6 feet above ground. This reduces the risk of storm surges and flooding, also improves greatly the ventilation, and provides for circulation through an open air system. Again, this reduces the amount of ammonia that is affecting the animals from their own manure and dunging within inside of the pens. Later on, I'll explain to you the type of flooring system that is going to also help facilitate better airflow throughout this type of system. This design here gives us the ability to see several things here. We will be looking at the roofing structure and the orientation of our buildings, which would greatly affect how air flows, how air interacts with the building, and overall how the air interacts with the animals. So the airflow, the roof design will facilitate a reduce in internal housing temperatures, okay, which is our overall goal in reducing heat stress, which promotes improved production and reproductive values, and also increases the consumption of feed, which gets these animals to within the parameters that we're able to execute. And these roofs are being designed to withstand high winds, which we are, as Dr. Stanley noted, we're directly affected in the hurricane belt. So high storm surges, high winds, and hurricanes have greatly affected these areas. And this is one of the design properties which are being put forward. This image here is an image that I'm going to use to explain a bit more about waste management system. A great part of our waste management system has to deal with the flooring system. We're going to apply a flooring system whereas we have a slatted floor system that the dung and urine matter will pass directly through the flooring system and will go on to a cast flooring system. This cast concrete design will facilitate manure collection through a manure scraper system, which is going to reduce the risk of reinfestation from parasites from the animals not being in direct contact with their dung matter. It's also going to promote and aid composting of this organic matter. This compost can serve as fertilizer for use on farm and can also be used and sold to local farmers and horticulturalists. Now, this gives the farmer the opportunity to develop an alternative source of income, which will offset some of his production costs. Okay, along our roofing system, we have quite a bit of space that is going to be able to provide catchment facilities. Understanding that within our region we have drought conditions, one of our recommendations is to provide a one of our recommendations is provide 2,000-gallon reservoir tanks to go ahead and actually catch waters off of the roof and also use that water to now facilitate potable drinking water for the animals. That water can also be used for regular maintenance. It can also be used for crop and pasture irrigation, and also to increase, obviously, drought resiliency. In certain areas of Long Island, we have noticed and we have received reports from the farmer of salt intrusion into the wells. So some of the wells are no longer available, but we can use this source of water as an opportunity to go ahead and provide potable water to our animals. Okay. Also in our design, we're going to provide a severe weather curtain. Now these curtains are going to be connected from the roof down to the floors. Now these curtains are serving multiple purposes during different times of the year, during different climatic conditions. Our first indicator, what we would like to consider, would be the extreme low temperatures that we do suffer in the Bahamas during the winter period. This temperature negatively impacts our kids and our lamb during our kidding and lambing season. But with these curtains, we have the opportunity to reduce the wind shear that is directly affecting these animals, and that promotes the better conditions for our animals to go through, which also maintains a more acceptable housing temperature during these cold periods. Now, these curtains also can be used during severe weather, storms, and also hurricanes to mitigate high wind and rain that can come from either side that can greatly affect the animals inside of our housing. This obviously reduces the risk of our animals becoming sick due to environmental condition and reducing some of our major issues like pneumonia once these animals would have been wet and allowed to be inside those stalls. Our next set of views is going to show our housing, our interior, as I stated before. This image shows a slatted flooring system that we would hope to employ inside of our structure. Now, these slatted floor systems, as you can see, they are slip resistant. They have nods on them to provide greater contact with the animal hooves to reduce slippage, but also the inserts of them, they have the ability to allow organic material, our dung material, and also urine to pass through, reducing the risks for reinfestation and contamination of our animals with their own fecal matter. This is a view of the housing system and how we would want to employ these types of slatted floors throughout the entire system that gives the entire house the ability to breathe correctly, reduce direct contact with their fecal matter, and also promote clear aeration. Our next slide is a view of our interior, how we expect our interior to be subdivided. You can see clearly the slatted floor systems being employed here in the sheep production unit, feeding systems, and also interpen separation, which allows for greater production in a reduced space. Thank you very much.
Okay, Dr. Cox, thank you very much. So here is the end of our little presentation today, and I want to reiterate that this is not the end of it. For you, specifically the farmers, that there would be ongoing training as we move into the implementation phase of this project. Now, as I said also, that this will be on the bank's website, and we are also going to put this on, create a YouTube channel and distribute among all stakeholders who are interested in viewing and to see what is expected in the project in going forward. So we are very sorry that we weren't able to come back to Long Island and deliver this training in person, so we could have had some interaction and some feedback and so forth. and to see how our proposed project is received. But there is also room for that with regards to after these things are on the website and the YouTube, then you could always ask some questions and we will be happy to respond to them where necessary. So thank you all very much for in advance for viewing the presentations, and we look forward to fielding your questions if there are any. As this workshop, we have to wrap this up, and of course look forward to, as I said, the implementation phase where farmers would be selected or engaged by the bank for a selection process. I think, I don't want to call a number here, but a number of farmers would be selected from the process having been engaged by the bank. And that may just be the initial set of persons, because we want to make sure that as many persons who are interested get interested in small ruminant. And of course, small ruminant production as it relates to Long Island. Long Island is the mecca of small ruminant production in the Bahamas. And so the more persons get involved with it, the better for it. And the further development of your mutton festival, or let's call it mutton festival, mutton fest, right? So that is important in going forward also, because we want to make sure that this project also takes into consideration that activity. So thanks once again, and see you all sometime again. Any final word, Dr. Cox?
Well, I'd like to thank all of the farmers who are participating in this workshop. We're here to serve, and this is an opportunity to continue to develop the subsector of small ruminants here in the Bahamas. Again, this is initially directed towards farmers in Long Island, but we would wish and hope that through some time that this project can be amplified and duplicated in numerous islands through the Bahamas. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity to provide our services to you, and we look forward to continuing to press and to train and to assist the development of this subsector.
Okay, and finally, I would like to thank the Bahamas Development Bank for their insight and the way they have pursued and made sure that this project is coming to fruition. And also like to thank also TradeCom, who would have provided the funds to do the consultancy, and all of this came together to make this a worthwhile venture. So goodbye and thanks to all.